Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness. And Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice. This is Donovan. And today we are going to talk about ways to stop feeling guilty. So Donovan, this could go in a lot of different avenues. So I'm happy to explore different contexts of not feeling guilty. But where would you like to start this conversation about not feeling guilty?
Yeah, so I think, top of mind, the first couple things that I can think of are guilt serves a purpose, right? There's a reason we feel guilty sometimes. Like there are certain actions we take that maybe we don't want to do in the future. And it's kind of like a feeling to kind of remind ourselves of this type of thing. And I think the not feeling guilty part comes when you kind of sit on that feeling for too long, right? That's when, because if you just don't want to ever feel guilty, I don't know if that's like super reasonable. It's like, I don't ever want to be sad or angry. Like these emotions come and go and they of certain kinds. So we're all going to feel it at some point, but I think it's feeling it in the right circumstances and feeling it in the right like duration. So that's the first thing that like comes to mind for me.
Yeah. I could see that. And I could see that, when I think of guilt, I think of kind of like using your moral compass, but everyone's moral compass might be a little different. So it might be hard to really say what's right or wrong. But, if there is one thing about like holding on to it and not being able to let it go, and then kind of defining yourself about like that bad thing that you did, but also, maybe there's something that you did and you didn't really fully understand the impact or the repercussions it had on another individuals. But then when you did, then you felt guilty about it. And then hopefully, maybe you would be inclined to not do that action or just be more mindful of understanding that could be hurtful or insensitive to that other human being. So it's kind of like, I'm trying to think of some examples of, actually one time I felt guilty. I remember back in college, I went to a party with my boyfriend at the time, and I was like really tired. I wanted to go home or to his place because I was just sleepy. And so he was actually, he was DJing, so he had to stay until like the end of it. And I was like, well, yeah, I'll just go home. And then he was like, yeah, you just leave the key in the mailbox or something for me to get in. And I forgot. And then my phone was on silent and I fell asleep. So when he got home, he was like very upset because he was just like stranded outside. I didn't leave the key out for him. I didn't answer my phone because I was asleep. And yeah, he was just waiting for like at 2 a.m. in the night, just kind of like trying to break into his house and couldn't. And yeah, so needless to say, he was very upset in the morning, or when I did finally wake up, and he was just like, yeah, I had gone over to a friend to hang until he woke up. And I was like, I feel so bad. I feel so guilty. But to make up for it though, because I feel like if I did something that had an impact on another being and it really sucked, I didn't mean to like be hurtful or mindless. But yeah, I would definitely be more cautious and follow directions and realize like the future implications of me not remembering like certain things because I was tired. But yeah, to make up for it, I think it's like making up for the things that you did to understand there was an impact. And I feel like I don't like when people are like, oh, I feel so bad, I feel terrible, but then they don't do anything about it. I'm like, well, I don't necessarily want you to feel bad for my sake when someone like does something towards me. I'm like, when my current boyfriend does something and he's like, I feel so terrible that happened. And I'm like, well, I don't want you to feel terrible. I want you to do something to make up for the thing that you did. And so, and maybe this is my brain work, and I'd be curious to see how your thoughts on this idea is. But what I did to make up for it was like I cleaned his room to make up for it, like for locking him out accidentally. But what ended up happening, he was like upset, or I don't know, I think he took it the wrong way because he took it like, I'm saying he's a slob and he needs to clean up his room. And I was like, in my mind, I was doing something nice for him, like taking out his trash and tidying up his room, to like make up for the fact that I did this terrible thing. But he kind of took it this other way of, like I'm saying he's not super clean or anything like that. So yeah, that's my long-winded story of how I felt guilty and how I responded to the guilt. But eventually we were able to move forward and continue our relationship. But I think people have different ideas on how to deal with the guilt. But that's kind of how I approached it in this scenario, which was over like a decade ago. So it was a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it speaks to some of the purposes of guilt, right? Some of the ways that guilt actually does something that's to some degree useful,
Yeah.
which being affirmed may not help you as much, but I think that's one of the things that it incites people to do is like, I feel bad in some way, so I should go to whatever party I've wronged and like comfort them or try to make them feel better in some way. And then I also think it creates, kind of that sense or that feeling of obligation. And some people, again, like you're talking about, it may be different.
Yeah.
But to like do something to like make amends for whatever the wrongdoing was, whatever it was, whether it be an accident or not.
Yeah.
So I think that's like some of the useful pieces. And I think, kind of when we're approaching it, or like the way that I would think about it is like, okay, so let me take out the pieces of this when I've done something that are useful and then move on, right? So because the problem I see is when people do something, they feel guilty about it,
Right.
and then they try to make amends for it,
Mhm.
and then they just carry that guilt around with them with no further intent or no action, nothing else to learn from it, right? Like they've got the learning, they did what they could to make it right, and then they still are just carrying the feeling around.
Yeah.
And it's that third part that like, you've kind of used the emotion. If you look for what you can learn and look for ways to make up for it, you've kind of used the emotion or like acted on the emotion in the way that it's useful. And I think like anger is a good parallel, right? Where like you can get angry over really, really dumb small things. In the same way, like you can feel guilty over like really, really dumb small things. The more useful path is like, okay, in what situations is this anger or guilt like useful? What is it telling me to do? Like what is it helping me navigate?
Mhm.
And I think like you were saying, I think one of the things that is useful, at least for trying to like start getting rid of that feeling, is to interact with whoever the other person is and try to make up for it.
Mhm.
And I think another piece of that, based on what you said, is like maybe asking around the type of actions you can take to make up for it, right? Because in what you said, like you just kind of did something that you thought would
Right.
make up for it,
Right.
and it was interpreted in a different way.
Mhm.
So maybe that's one extra just like little piece or caveat that I picked up from that, which is like,
Yeah.
if you felt like you wronged someone, maybe ask them what
Mhm.
it takes to make up for it. And by doing that, you'll have a much better idea of where it falls in their mind, right?
Mhm.
Because I think part of the guilt is like, oh no, this person, it's like reputation control, right?
Yeah.
And maybe people don't think about it that specifically, but there's some piece of it that's like, oh, I need to make sure I don't ruin this relationship with this thing I've done. So
Mhm.
you can ask them to make sure that that's not happening, to make sure that it's actually like going the way that you think it is.
Mhm. Yeah, no, definitely. I think it would have made a difference if I just inquired, I feel terrible about this. What can I do to make up for it? And just inquiry. And maybe it would be within reason, like the punishment fits the crime kind of thing. But I just realized this is something I do when, my current boyfriend does something that upsets me, and then he was kind of like, I know he never intentionally tries to be a dick sometimes, but sometimes like that's like the outcome, and I give him like specific like homework assignments of like, watch this video, read this book, do this thing, and that will make up for it. And yeah, I think it's just a little clear when you can, and goes both ways. It's just being clear with your communication goes back into how that can make up for whatever wrongdoing it has. And it is important to also see it from the other side of, realizing, that person, more or less, you don't really fully know the intention of the other person, but, I like to, if it's someone I care about and someone I know that cares about me, I'm going to assume they weren't trying to intentionally hurt me. And to realize, maybe they were being kind of absent-minded and not like paying attention or focused to like the impact it had on me, and being like understanding of that, being a little compassionate, and realizing that, people are human, they make mistakes, to have space for forgiveness. And I don't want to hold a grudge and make someone feel guilty. That doesn't make me feel necessarily any better. But I don't know, not everyone might agree with me. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think, on the flip side of that, I think it's prudent to kind of keep that kind of those sets of ideas in mind for yourself, right? Because I think a lot of people hold the guilt, and there's some people who hold the grudge forever, but there's a lot of people who hold this guilt with them, and they won't forgive themselves, whereas they forgive other people for doing things really
Right.
easily.
Mhm.
And there's kind of a important point there where it's like, in the same way that like you might want to think about if someone else was asking you for advice for your own problems, like what would you tell them? In the same way, like if someone had done what you did, knowing
Mhm.
what you know, et cetera, like would you forgive them, or like what level, would you expect them to feel bad or whatever? Now, sometimes this can get miscalibrated because it can go the wrong way and be like, they should feel horrible because they really screwed me over and they don't feel bad at all. Like this is ridiculous. Like that can
Mhm.
definitely happen. But it is one more tool that we can use to like give ourselves a little bit more space from the guilt, because I have
Mhm.
definitely run into people who are really like carry this guilt around with them for something
Mhm.
that the other person has forgiven them for long ago, or didn't even bother them that much in the first place.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that too, where it just can, be a weight on you, and you kind of allow it feeds into like defining who you are and your value. If you see yourself as like, I'm this terrible person because I did that thing that one time, even though, the person forgave, and we'd like to move on. If this person really cared for you, then they would want you to like be so distraught about it, ideally, in an ideal situation. I think it's just letting go of the guilt, like realizing that, yeah, the past is the past and you can't do anything about it. And all you can do is just be a little more mindful moving forward and decide how do you want to live your life moving forward. Like the past, it sucks. It's important to acknowledge the impact it had on that other individual. It's not productive necessarily to be like, oh, well, I didn't know any better, so oh well. And just like, I think there's a danger of that on the flip side of just like never feeling guilty about anything, and not accepting. I think it really comes down to responsibility, accepting responsibility for the thing that you did, not being like, yeah, maybe you didn't know any better, but you can still accept responsibility for that thing that happened and the impact that it had. And then you can decide like, okay, moving forward, this is what I'm going to do to prevent that thing from happening, to prevent hurting or messing up someone else's life to some extent. Yeah.
And I think that's really key when it comes to dealing with emotions like this, where basically you can just sit and ruminate on it forever, but it
Mhm.
doesn't actually do anything, right? Like,
Yeah.
so spending time to focus on the actions you can actually take,
Mhm.
or what you can learn, or what you can do to make amends, like those are the things that are going to be fruitful. Whereas just sitting there replaying the event over and over and over and ruminating on it, um, that doesn't change anything. Like you were saying, like it's the same event. So at least for me, like just trying to work on this relationship or develop it as a whole with quite a few emotions. Again, going back to anger, like instead of sitting and just stewing on something that makes me angry, figuring out like what are the things I can actually do about it. Developing that same type of relationship with guilt has helped me to not fall into those pits and not sit there and go, "Ah, I really shouldn't have done that. I can't believe I did that. I can't believe that's what happened. I can't believe I did it," for hours.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, an example, I guess, might be um, also kind of realizing that no one's like one state of being, or no one's a fixed way of being is kind of how I'd like to define it, and be like, just like a simple example of, if a person was consistently late all time and they show up and they're like, oh, I feel so bad, but then they're still consistently late all the time, and they don't realize, fully or maybe they do realize the impact that like people are waiting around for you to show up so we can start the meeting or whatever that might be. But realizing, and just if you kind of be like, hold this identity that I'm a late bad person, that's not productive. You can like, instead of like looking at like, okay, what actions am I taking? Okay, if I just leave 15 minutes earlier than what I think I normally should, then I should have enough of a buffer to get there on time, regardless of if there's traffic or parking issues or whatever that might be, just to realize, you can create structures and actions, and that you don't have to be stuck in this like, oh, I'm just a late bad person and I suck, and not do anything about it. Or you can try to take actions to move forward to not have that be a reoccurring theme.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I've run into plenty of people who feel like certain attributes, not attributes, certain actions they take or sequences of actions are fixed in some way.
Mhm.
And when you think like that, then it's really easy to keep doing things that cause you guilt, and then think, like you were saying, like, I don't know what else I'm going to do. Like, I feel bad, but
Oh,
this is
yeah.
just how it is.
Yeah.
And I think it's like a good space to open up how important it is to set up your environment in a way that works for you, or look for alternatives. Like that leaving late thing, like, it could happen for a number of reasons, or like showing up late, but there are ways that you can work on that. Like if you can't keep time very well naturally, then you better set a bunch of alarms and leave before you're supposed to, and like maybe get someone else to call you when you're supposed to leave, or like there are things that you can do to set up your environment. And like, sure, you may naturally just like not be aware of the time very often, but you can add in things to change the actions you take. Like that baseline might be that baseline, but it doesn't determine the outcomes. So in the same way, like if there's these things that you feel like are part of your identity that are causing you guilt, it's probably not. It's probably the way your environment's set up. And there's probably some space to look for some things or ways to do things differently, that those outcomes will be different. But you have to look and see like, okay, what's causing me to act in this way? What's causing me to like do this behavior? Or where in the chain, like, can I make changes to not do this? And I don't think that that's something that everyone thinks of or believes. But it really makes a huge difference just believing that, our outcomes are not dictated by who we are. That's just maybe, like I was saying, some baselines, right? You might not be able to keep time very well, but that doesn't mean you need to be late.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I could see that being really important. But I'm trying to think of some other examples or other ways that people can kind of let go of the guilt. What if it's like a bigger thing? Like, what if someone cheats on their spouse or something like that? What would your thoughts be around something like that? On how to let go of the guilt? And I'm like, obviously you should probably feel bad a little bit, but I don't know, like how long do you carry that around? Or are you kind of repeating the behavior? Is it a consistent pattern, or is it like a one-time thing? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
In that realm, or at that magnitude,
Mhm.
I really think everything pretty much applies the same,
Yeah.
but just more. And since the impacts on your life are bigger, they're
Yeah.
more important things. It's more important that you set your life up in a way that you're actually going to be able to like not make those choices in the future, or at the very least get to the bottom of kind of what's going on in those dynamics, right? Like perhaps like for that person, if they let themselves go into certain environments, then that's like where that behavior is most likely to happen. And like if you let's say that the person like, oh, when they drink too much, then something might happen sometimes, because that happens. Well, like, okay, so just don't put yourself in that situation. Like bail out way earlier. Like don't go to events where that outcome is likely to be the case, or where you're likely to be in that situation. And then if it gets to the point where I've talked to people before where it's like, well, I like going to those types of like things. I like doing those kinds of activities. And it's like, okay, but you have to weigh that off against how much it costs you on the other end, right? It's not like this uh, zero sum thing. It's not that it's this like, I don't know, it's not this instant like you go and do it and then you feel bad and then you never do it again when you're presented with the exact same situation. Like situations are important. And just like what opportunities are in front of us heavily dictate what kind of actions we take. In the same way, like if you don't want to drink and you keep alcohol in the house, like that's a bad move. Like, and maybe you drink and feel guilty about it because you're trying to stop, but
Yeah.
like you're making those decisions at the hardest point, which is when it's right in your face, right? When you're opening the cupboard and it's sitting right there and you're looking at it, like that's the hardest
Yeah.
time to make the decision. So at the same scale but bigger, like if you have things that are seriously impacting your life, you really have to sit down and figure out what situations get you into something like that. And when it comes to something like like cheating in a relationship, you kind of also just have to accept like the totality of it, right? You have to spend some time thinking about like how much is that impacting the other person, what were the expectations, what is going to work moving forward, if anything. And also like you were talking about before, accept responsibility if that person no longer wants to be with you. Like that's part of the outcomes of the choices that were made.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I've really added anything since I started talking, but that's kind of how I feel on that end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I think you brought up like two really good points of just like, one, shifting your environment, paying attention to your environment, that kind of makes you more conducive to do those not so great actions or behaviors that lead to you feeling guilty in the first place. But also, I think the thing that you brought up of like looking at the underlying, looking deeper is super important, especially like in cases of infidelity where, it wasn't just like you cheated and that was like it. It's like usually, typically I hear from most people, there's unhappiness in the marriage or the relationship way long before the cheating happens. And it's like, maybe if you like were better about communicating about the situation or went to marriage therapists or, dealt with it rather than avoiding it beforehand, before it progressed, where you just felt like completely alone and isolated in your relationship, that you felt like, oh, well, I'm practically alone, so why not? Kind of a thing, to realize, there could have been actions before. So if that relationship doesn't work out for whatever reason, and you're moving on to a new relationship, to really like, hey, maybe I need to be more present to how I'm being in the relationship, how I'm feeling in the relationship before it progresses to the point of something to that magnitude, I think is really key. And it's going back to exploring the root cause of, and it's not always pretty to look at the not so pretty fun parts of a relationship, but it's the reality of like every relationship is work. Relationships are hard. Sometimes it's not always rainbows and butterflies. I mean, yeah, it can be sometimes. But yeah, it's just like you gotta realize that relationships are work, and it's not always an easy out kind of a thing. So accepting responsibility for your part, or whether you were the cheater or the person that got cheated on, to realize like, yeah, that was there's something maybe in the relationship we could have done differently moving forward.
Yeah, and I think there's also one extra piece I'd like to color in, which is I think sometimes people just want um, more than is realistic, or want some sort of a setup that's not realistic. Like, oh, I would like to hold on to this thing, except it's not fulfilling me in all the ways that I want. So I also want this thing, even though it's not compatible with the contract I've made with this other person. So I'm just going to do it and feel guilty and like go. You can feel guilty without anybody knowing or being harmed or anything like that. Like you can still feel the guilt. So I think it's important to recognize sometimes in situations like that where like there's these conflicting things that you want. You can take a path that like ruins relationships, and this isn't just for like cheating type of thing, but there are other situations. But like sometimes you just have to like do difficult parts of things. And like you can do it the worst way, which is do something you feel guilty about and then let it build up and then wait till that explodes at some point down the future, or the feeling just builds up in yourself to the point where it's like unbearable. Or you can, just recognize that you will have to push through uncomfortable situations because that's like the way that life is. Like I feel like sometimes it's, this idea of like, oh, I can have this fairy tale like where I have this
Right.
person who's my stable person and I have this person who's my hot like go out person, and like
Fun piece.
and I don't have to like reconcile that or figure that out or make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Right.
I felt like just recognizing some situations require like uncomfortable pieces and pushing through and working stuff out can help you in the earlier stages to not make those decisions. Because either way, you're going to have to deal with the stuff. It's just when and at what extreme.
Yeah, exactly. It's a really good point. Cool. Well, I think we kind of covered this topic pretty well. Was there anything else that you wanted to add?
Nope.
Cool. All right. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this episode, and I hope you let go of the guilt, but also understand your responsibility and your impact of your actions. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
You can check out more content at howtohappy.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date on the videos. We've also got a Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook that you can check out. Reflect, take action, and enjoy life. See you next time.